Chapter 834. There was silence in the conference room. One could even say that it was dead silent. Everyone was looking at the mysterious His Majesty. They were looking at Jiang Guochu next to His Majesty. Everyone's heart was full of absurd emotions. Jiang Guochu, the fourth follower. Everyone had a feeling that the wind was too strong for them to hear clearly. His Majesty now only had 4 followers. The first follower, Moraid, used to be the second commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps, and now the Grand Knight of Knights Templars. The second follower was famous in Zhongzhou State. White Tiger, one of the 4 spirit generals, died in the chaos of Eastern Europe. The third follower was Yagyu Kurasumi, the leader of Jifeng Sword Reigning School. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital was now guarding Heaven Capital. Compared with 3 years ago when the Purgatory of Heaven Capital first appeared, its strength was not as good as before. Yagyu Kurasumi had truly stabilized his position as a great grandmaster in East Island. And now, His Majesty's 4th follower. The patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Guochu. Europe, East Island, America. 3 regions, 3 followers. At this moment, even though everyone present was His Majesty's collaborator, everyone still felt palpitations in their hearts. Although in general, there was not a strong relationship between His Majesty and his followers, and they were cooperating with each other, many relationships never paid attention to nominal subordination. The most important thing was whether the relationship between the 2 parties was solid. His Majesty would not restrain his followers too much. For example, Yagyu Kurasumi was the 3rd follower, but Jifeng Sword Reigning School was still an absolutely autonomous force. Perhaps the only exception was Moraid, but His Majesty had never asked him to do anything. Moraid was willing to be a loyal dog at His Majesty's feet, and it was entirely his voluntary behavior. But as a follower, he also had responsibilities to bear. His Highnesses could also influence their forces through followers and use their strength. This was like cooperation, but also like a transaction, very equal. It sounded simple. But in fact, it was not easy at all. When a superior faced his subordinates, he considered ruling and ensuring their loyalty and position. When His Majesty faced his followers, he considered how to maintain their long-term and stable relationship. If this was a transaction, then the most important thing was whether what the 2 sides gave each other was equal. This was also the core secret between His Majesty and his followers. No one knew what His Majesty would give him after he became His Majesty's disciple. Nor did anyone know that His Majesty had given Mordesh. What was that? But as long as the disciples believed that what His Majesty had given them was worth the price, such transactions and cooperation would never go wrong. And this kind of relationship would also be more easily accepted by various countries. The royal family of East Island had never expressed any opinion on the master of Jifeng Sword Reigning School becoming His Majesty's follower. Now, Jiang Guochu had also become His Majesty's disciple. What His Majesty gave Jiang Guochu was no longer important. Since he was willing to be a follower, it proved that he could not refuse what His Majesty was giving him. Being unable to refuse also meant that this kind of cooperation was unbreakable, at least in the short term. It was no longer a matter of His Majesty having one more follower. With the addition of Jiang Guochu, His Majesty, Knights Templars, and Jifeng Sword Reigning School had one more reliable ally. And the Jiang family of South America also had the help of His Majesty, Knights Templars, and Jifeng Sword Reigning School. His Majesty had another ally by his side. This was a good thing for everyone in the alliance. Tianhai Wuji lowered his head and took a sip of tea, his eyes twinkling. He was not His Majesty's follower. Now seeing this scene, he had begun to subconsciously consider the next situation of Wuji Palace. Wang Qinglei looked at His Majesty, then at Jiang Guochu, and finally kept silent. He was a counselor of Zhongzhou State, and he would even strive for the presidency of Zhongzhou State in the future. It was impossible for him to become His Majesty's follower. Wang Xiaoyao also had his own pride, and it was also impossible for him to appear as a follower. Now seeing Jiang Guochu actually standing behind His Majesty, the 2 of them had mixed feelings. They looked at each other and didn't speak. The feeling of helplessly watching a strong competitor rise was not a good one. But fortunately, for now, Jiang Guochu becoming the fourth follower was more beneficial to the war of the Wang family of Beihai. What did he give you? Wang Xiaoyao glanced at Jiang Guochu and suddenly asked. Jiang Guochu sat next to His Majesty. Hearing this, he raised his eyes and glanced at Wang Xiaoyao, then said blandly, the future. There were many possibilities in the future. So the answer was extremely vague. Wang Xiaoyao shrugged and took a deep look at him, speechless. Jiang Guochu's expression was calm and peaceful. What His Majesty gave him was indeed the future. His future and the future of the Jiang family of South America. Within 5 years, His Majesty promised to make him really close to the threshold of the peak of the invincible realm. And it could be foreseen that this alliance would not disappear at the moment. Jifeng Sword Raining School, the Jiang family of South America, Knights Templars, this was just the beginning. It already looked extremely beautiful. There would be more people. More forces joining this alliance. There was no rule here. There were only interests and mutual cooperation. Interests were the eternal theme. Perhaps one day in the future, this alliance would disband because of internal strife. But with His Majesty, these days would not come. As for the further future, at that time, no matter what the alliance did, the Jiang family of South America would get enough interests and would not lose anything. The name of a follower sounded unpleasant, but compared to interests, these were not worth mentioning. Congratulations, Your Majesty. A hoarse voice with a thick Nordic accent rang out. The already gloomy atmosphere in the conference room seemed to darken even more. The hoarse voice echoed slightly and silently. A foot stepped on the ground in front of everyone, followed by a man in black standing in front of the desk. Wang Xiaoyao suddenly felt that the man's dress was a little familiar. The black cloak covered the whole body. He could not see the face, figure, or even whether the person was a man or a woman. He looked down at himself. He found that the two of them dressed almost the same. The corners of his mouth twitched, and he narrowed his eyes. Ju? King Xiaoyao, nice to meet you. Hello. In the black cloak, the hoarse voice laughed in a low voice. If there are any hidden experts in the Wang family of Beihai, you can tell me. I can kill them in advance. You can kill as many people as you want in Mount Dibing, including Wang Xingxiao. How do you want him to die? Wang Xiaoyao gently raised the corners of his mouth. He glanced around with a faint smile. That's a little interesting. Among all of you, Ju's combat capability may not be the strongest, but when it comes to killing people, no one can compare with him, including me. His Majesty whispered. No one denied that. He was the only invincible realm killer who was still in the peak state. He was cruel, cold, ruthless, and cunning. He had evolved the peak assassination skills to the extreme. Standing here, he represented the highest level of all the killers in the dark world in this era. His Majesty, Moraid, Wang Xiaoyao, Yagyu Kurumi, Tianhai Wuji, Ju, and Jiang Guochu. 7 invincible realm experts. This was the strongest lineup they had when waging war against Beihai. It was also the greatest confidence for them in Zhongzhou State. In the case that more than half of the invincible realm experts in the dark world had withered, the 7 of them represented the supreme of the dark world. Let's get started. His Majesty reached out and knocked on the conference table, then said in a soft voice. Chapter 835. There was no courtesy or concealment in the meeting in the name of trial. Before the war broke out, this was the last coordination between the top leaders of several superpowers. They had all proved their sincerity before. Now, they were discussing the ultimate power to join the war. The first batch of lurkers from Knights Templars is already in place. 4 Grand Knights have secretly arranged it. Within 3 days, the second batch of elites will sneak into the city of Floating Island. There are 3 experts at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm, 9 in the Thunder-Shocking Realm, 70 in the Fire-Flaming Realm, and more than 100 in the Ice-Condensing Realm. We have contacted the intelligence personnel of Zhongzhou State and exchanged some information to a certain extent. After the war breaks out, within 3 hours, Floating Island will fall into a state of chaos. In the most urgent time, we can at least hold off the 20,000 garrison troops of Floating Island City for more than 5 hours. Morade's voice was calm and confident, which was proportional to the power he showed. Floating Island in North Sea was the territory of the Tang family. The 7 sword-holding families were all wealthy families with deep roots. There might be strong and weak ones, but none of them were easy to deal with. With the garrison troops of the Beihai Corps stationed in each city, it was no exaggeration to say that no matter which city they attacked, it would be a real hard battle. The so-called state of chaos referred to the paralysis of some core urban functions of Floating Island in the shortest time, such as traffic, communication signals, and command systems, causing chaos from top to bottom in the whole city. The elites of Knights Templars had prepared everything in Floating Island City. As long as the war broke out, from causing chaos to holding off the garrison troops and retreating, they could at least prevent Floating Island City from helping Mount Dibbing for 12 hours. 12 hours didn't sound long. But in a war that was racing against time, 12 hours was enough to decide everything. Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace have joined forces to arrange in Kanglan City. The first batch is already in place, and the second batch of elites will arrive before the war. We are preparing to contact the intelligence personnel of Zhongzhou State. Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, touched the broken beard at the corner of his mouth and looked at his watch. He said slowly, at this time, they should have already started to contact. Is Kanglan City so important? In the black cloak, Zhu raised his head and glanced at Tianhai Wuji. He tooted and said, Kanglan City is just a small city. You want the 2 major martial arts sects of East Island to join forces? Is your ability too weak, or is the Jiang family of Kanglan too strong? I heard that the Heaven Saber has been killed by Li Tianlan. What are you worried about? The Kanglan Jiang clan is loyal, brave, and fearless. Even without Heaven Blade, the Jiang clan is still the Jiang clan. No one can say that they are weak. As for us, Yagyu Kureisen, the master of Jifeng Sword Training School, twitched the corner of his mouth. Of course, we're not weak. In this war, we've invested 11 superiors of the half-step invincible realm, more than 30 superiors of the thunder-shocking realm, nearly 100 superiors of the thunder-shocking realm, nearly 800 superiors of the fire-flaming realm, and nearly 3,000 superiors below the fire-flaming realm. Absolutely, do you think Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace are weak with such a lineup? There was dead silence in the conference room. The atmosphere seemed to be even stiffer than when His Majesty had announced that the 4th pupil was Jiang Guochu. Everyone cursed in their hearts. 11 half-step invincible realm experts. There were more than 30 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. There were nearly 100 thunder-shocking realm experts. Nearly 1,000 fire-flaming realm experts. 3,000 elites below the fire-flaming realm. What kind of power is this? This was simply a real army. Judging from the strength on paper, neither the world-famous Border Control Corps of Zhongzhou State nor the immovable Beihai Corps were as powerful as this one. It could even be said that the army was far inferior. It was impossible for Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace to come up with such power. Even if their strength was doubled, they couldn't come up with such a power. Throughout the entire Dark World, only the superpowers like Zhongzhou State and Star State could come up with such a lineup. Superpowers? Maybe only the Wang family of Beihai could have such a terrifying lineup. The strength of the entire East Island is roughly like this. Zhu, whose face was stiff, murmured to himself. Suddenly, he froze. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kureisen. The 2 grandmasters of East Island didn't say anything. They just looked at him quietly. This is the strength of the entire East Island? He took a deep breath and asked slowly. East Island is ours. It belongs to His Majesty the Mikado. Is there a problem? Tianhai Wuji said calmly. When he spoke, he glanced at His Majesty intentionally or unintentionally. His Majesty sat in a cloud of starlight and didn't seem to respond. Everyone could feel his gentleness and smile. He didn't speak. He had nothing to say. More than 4 years ago, Zhongzhou State conspired against East Island with all its power. More than 4 years later, East Island conspired against Beihai with all its power. Tianhai Wuji pursed his lips, and his eyes looked a little savage. It was indeed the power of a whole country. East Island had already suffered a great loss in the final battle of Heaven Capital. As the purgatory of Heaven Capital moved further and further away from them, East Island became weaker and weaker. His Majesty's will was passed to His Majesty the Mikado through Jifeng sword. Without any hesitation, the Mikado directly made this seemingly crazy decision. This lineup was almost more than 80% of the existing strength of East Island. And the battlefront they were responsible for was naturally more than one city. It was Kanglan, Tongtian, and Qiushui. 3 cities and 80,000 square kilometers of land. That was the territory that the Wang family of Beihai took away from East Island hundreds of years ago. With this island, which had always been called North Island and East Island, the territory of Beihai doubled, and now there was a beautiful land of 160,000 square kilometers. Everyone in East Island could never forget the humiliation that the last Mikado suffered in Beihai when he visited the Wang family of Beihai and tried to take back this territory. And now, the opportunity was here. People in East Island didn't need to smile apologetically anymore, and they didn't need to bow down anymore. If you don't give it to me, I will take it. I don't care if there are corpses everywhere and blood flows like rivers. And this action also had a code name in East Island, which was, return. Let the land that belonged to East Island return. From the very beginning, East Island regarded this action as a war. A real, highest-level war. Kanglan, Tongtian, and Qiushui, half of Beihai province will become our war zone. The combat teams and fleets of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace will be on standby at any time. We won't detonate the so-called chaos. Or rather, we won't just do that. The 3 so-called sword-holding families, the Jiang family of Kanglan, the Qin clan of Tongtian, and Huangfu of Qiushui, will completely disappear and be destroyed in this war. We can promise you that no matter how long the war lasts, no one from the 3 cities south of Kanglan River will go to support Mount Dibing. Yagyu Kurumi's voice was clear and firm. His expression was serious and solemn. Wu Ju curled his lips and fell completely silent. The combat teams and fleets of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace? Bulsh *T, Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace didn't have any combat teams and fleets. Combat teams were the standard configuration of the various superpowers. They were also the core combatants of the various superpowers and the strongest aerial forces. Combat teams generally consisted of the world's first-rate fighters, some even super first-rate fighters, such as helicopters, transport planes, and reconnaissance planes, to form a large-scale combat team. Whether it was Jifeng Sword Raining School or Wuji Palace, they weren't superpowers. They couldn't afford it at all. They could afford it if they gritted their teeth, but they couldn't afford daily maintenance, combat personnel, fleet command, private air routes, and training. The fleet was even more exaggerated. It was a navy on the right track. Among the superpowers in the Dark World, only the Wang family of Beihai had its own fleet. Nominally, it still belonged to the Beihai Corps and Zhongzhou State. The so-called fleet and combat teams were obviously the power of East Island. In this action, East Island was totally going to seize this opportunity to stake everything on one throw. We are foreign aid, and most of us are active in Queen City. All of you here are friends of the Jiang family of South America, and the Jiang family of South America will not be stingy with its feathers. Our 3 superiors of the half-step invincible realm are already in Queen City, and the second batch of elites will soon enter Beihai. There are nearly 800 people in total, and they are all elites. We can also make Queen City unable to support Mount Dibing in a short time. Jiang Guochu smiled and said in a gentle voice. I have few people, not as many as you. His Majesty can arrange it. Wu Ju shrugged. The so-called rising invincible realm expert was also a killer. Although he was also building his own team, his foundation was inevitably less than that of the people present. His Majesty nodded and looked at Wang Qinglei. Don't worry about Lioli City. Even if the strength is insufficient, His Majesty Wang Xiaoyao can directly control the patriarch of the Yi family as soon as it happens. As for Xingzhou City, Zhongzhou State will do its best to clear the obstacles for you. Wang Qinglei's voice was calm. His Majesty nodded and looked very satisfied. There were only 3 groups of people attacking Beihai. The first group went into Beihai to lurk. The second group was the support force of the first group of elites, and it would also be the main force to detonate the chaos. And the third group. His Majesty, Morade, Jiang Guochu, Wang Xiaoyao, Yagyu Kurumi, Tianhai Wuji, and Wu Ju were all in the third group. They would take a small number of elites and rush directly to Mount Dibbing. This was the strongest force. And Mount Dibbing would also be the final battlefield. It was expected that in 8 hours, the entire Beihai would be turned upside down. Your Highness, do you have anything else to add? His Majesty glanced at Wang Xiaoyao and suddenly asked with a smile. No. Wang Xiaoyao said blandly, this is already very good. He stared at the table in front of him, a little absent-minded. He thought of the raging force that was about to rush into Beihai. He suddenly thought of his big brother, who would stand in front of him no matter what danger there was when he was a child. Sword Emperor, thinking of that figure. Beihai, thinking of that land. Wang Xiaoyao took a deep breath, and his eyes suddenly became extremely cruel and cold. Chapter 836. His Majesty looked at Wang Xiaoyao seriously and didn't speak for a while. In the clouds and starlight, he sat there, and his aura was calm and deep. Wang Xiaoyao seemed to know what he wanted to say. He sorted out his thoughts and said blandly, when the time comes, my people will automatically cooperate with you. There's no need to say more. Compared with you, I don't have many people, but whether it's ability, loyalty, or position, they can play a great role. You need me to sneak in, and you also need me to retreat. His Majesty nodded and said softly, it's best if your Highness is willing to do your best. I have no way out. Wang Xiaoyao was expressionless. This could be said to be the biggest crisis of the Wang family of Beihai in the past 100 years, and he also became the biggest traitor in the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years. It was no exaggeration to say that the Wang family of Beihai also had chaos and purges in history, but as the lineal brother of the patriarch, Wang Xiaoyao was the first traitor in the history of the entire Wang family of Beihai. If he and Wang Qinglei succeeded in their plan, it would start a new era of the Wang family of Beihai. But if the plan failed, Wang Xiaoyao would definitely not have a good end, not to mention what would happen to Wang Qinglei. It was a small matter that he was smashed to pieces. In the next decades or hundreds of years, he would even be spurned by the descendants of the Wang family of Beihai for many years. He really had no way out, so he had to go all out. His Majesty moved his body and seemed to be relieved. He smiled, looked at Wang Qinglei, and asked, Speaker, do you have anything to add? Wang Qinglei was his partner, and many things that should be said had actually been said before the meeting. But now Wang Qinglei was sitting here, representing not only his partner, but also the attitude and will of the whole Zhongzhou state towards this war. East Island could attack Beihai with all its strength. The Vatican and the Jiang family of South America could also send out all their elites. Even if Zhongzhou state didn't send out a single soldier, Wang Qinglei was also qualified to sit here. Because Beihai still belonged to Zhongzhou state after all. What they needed most was the acquiescence of Zhongzhou state. What was more, what Zhongzhou state gave them was not only acquiescence but also considerable help. So even His Majesty respected Wang Qinglei very much. Before I came here, I had a detailed and in-depth communication with the Prime Minister. In principle, Zhongzhou state agrees to activate all the chess pieces hidden in Beihai and provide you with all the help, including intelligence, concealment, attack routes, assassination targets, and even direct participation in the battle and evacuation plans, as well as entry and exit routes. Wang Qinglei said calmly, for this war, Zhongzhou state is very determined. We will give you great support, but we have only one request. Please go ahead. His Majesty said seriously. Everyone sat up straight, their faces solemn. Efficiency. Wang Qinglei's voice was crisp and cold. We just need to be efficient and fast. The sooner, the better. It's even best to launch the war within 3 days. This matter has been delayed for a long time. Given the current political environment of Zhongzhou State, everyone's time is very tight. So, the sooner, the better. 3 days, Tianhai Wuji was the first to frown. That's impossible. It was indeed impossible. Their first batch of elites had just finished the initial lurking. Although the second batch of elites had been selected, they had not yet entered Beihai province. This was also the fundamental goal of this meeting. To be exact, it was the handover of intelligence. Intelligence about Beihai. The Vatican, the Jiang family of South America, East Island, Zhongzhou State, Wang Xiaoyao, and Zhu. All the intelligence about the Wang family of Beihai was handed over by all the superpowers. This was destined to be a very long and boring process. They had to make sure that every key chess pieces roll at the critical moment. And the way to deal with the failure of the chess pieces. They had to use each other's intelligence to make up for the shortcomings in their own reports, so as to work out a more perfect plan. 3 days. Not to mention how long it would take for the second batch of elites to sneak in. They couldn't even finish the handover of intelligence. Wang Qinglei nodded to show that he understood, but he still said the same thing, the sooner, the better. It doesn't seem to be so urgent yet. Zhu's voice sounded slowly. I know the situation in your country. Your president and prime minister still have at least a year. Oh, maybe less than a year. It's winter now, and their terms will end in late autumn tomorrow. Nearly a year is enough for us to prepare well. I think, 3 months later, it's probably the spring festival or the first lunar month of Zhongzhou State. We can all be well prepared. At that time, we can give Beihai a big New Year gift, isn't it? It's very ceremonial. Wang Qinglei praised with a poker face, but it's extremely stupid. Zhu's face darkened, and he didn't speak. I said to start in advance not only because of the 2 leaders' terms of office, but also for your consideration. Zhongzhou State will do its best to help you avoid an enemy that none of you want to meet. Believe me, none of you, including His Majesty, wants to meet him. Everyone froze for a moment. You mean Li Tianlan? Yagyu Kurumi asked directly. Today, Zhongzhou State also had a new invincible realm expert, Saint, and the top invincible realm expert, Gong Sun Qi. But looking at all the experts in Zhongzhou State, Yagyu Kurumi didn't know what others thought. At least, the last person he wanted to meet was Li Tianlan. And he was keenly aware that when he said the name, everyone's body tightened for a moment. Even the clouds and starlight around His Majesty unnaturally stagnated for a moment. Li Tianlan. Many people in the Dark World, and even most of them, thought that after the end of the chaos in Eastern Europe, except for the reclusive Lin clan and Lin Fengting, Li Tianlan was now the top expert in the Dark World. Whether they were convinced by this evaluation or not, it was true that no one was willing to face Li Tianlan and 13 floors. Did Li Tianlan agree to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai? His Majesty sat up straight and looked extremely serious. There is no definite news yet, but we all know that the possibility of their cooperation is very high. The 2 leaders have been to the desert prison. Li Tianlan did not give a clear response. He just said that he needed to think about it. What he promised was that if the war broke out, he would not appear on the battlefield. Wang Qinglei said. What else do we need to worry about? Moraid asked subconsciously. This promise is not reliable, at least we think so. The longer we delay, the more likely it is that Li Tianlan will break his promise. If a person really wants to break his promise, he can find a reason at will. It's not a problem to even think of a reason after doing it. What I want to say is that before Li Tianlan made this promise, he had not talked to Wang Xingxiao. When the 2 leaders visited Li Tianlan, Wang Xingxiao was also there. No one knows the content of their negotiation, but I can be sure that after Li Tianlan negotiated with Wang Xingxiao, Saint personally went to Mount Dibbing and took away the coldness of 9 states. Wang Qinglei's voice was cold. This may be, snap. Before he could finish his words, a clear and melodious voice suddenly rang out. In an instant, the conference room, which was full of red and dark tones, was occupied by a haze. The haze was like light, like clouds and mist, boundless, with an almost eternal silence. The hazy light appeared and disappeared in an instant. Everyone's heart palpitated for a moment. In their line of sight, His Majesty's figure, he had stood up abruptly. The teacup in his hand was crushed by him. Looking at Wang Qinglei, his breath had become completely stiff. No one could see his expression, but everyone could feel His Majesty's solemnity at this time. Li Tianlan, His Majesty stared at Wang Qinglei. Took away the coldness of 9 states? Are you sure? Yes. Wang Qinglei frowned. He felt a little uncomfortable under His Majesty's gaze. How long ago did this happen? His Majesty's voice was still calm, but everyone could feel his annoyance. This matter was not a secret to Wang Qinglei, but it was ridiculous that they didn't know it until now. More than a month, nearly 2 months ago. Wang Qinglei replied. You. His Majesty suddenly raised his hand and pointed at Wang Qinglei, then put it down hard. He stood where he was and was silent for a long time. Then he took a deep breath and smiled. Fortunately, it's not too late. I don't understand what you mean. Wang Qinglei said slowly. That's because you don't know what the 13th floor is. His Majesty said heavily and suddenly said, I agree with Zhongzhou State's plan. Everyone, we don't have enough time. 1 month. I hope that within a month, we can start a war that can destroy Mount Dibbing in Beihai. It can't be more than 50 days at most. Otherwise, we may encounter big trouble, real big trouble. What trouble? Li Tianlan alone fights against all of us? Zhu sneered. It's not Li Tianlan. His Majesty said slowly, it's Li Tianlan and the 13th floor. So, we must speed up all actions at all costs. Before His Majesty's voice faded away, his cell phone suddenly rang. Wang Qinglei subconsciously looked at the number, and his face changed slightly. He subconsciously picked it up and whispered, Prime Minister. Everyone was stunned at the same time. They looked at Wang Qinglei and didn't speak. What? No one could hear clearly what the Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State said on the phone. But suddenly, Wang Qinglei's face changed dramatically, and he stood up all at once. His body trembled slightly, and his face was a little pale. His Majesty looked at this scene, and his heart suddenly sank. Wang Qinglei held the table with one hand and tried his best to hold the phone with the other. Chen Fangqing was still talking on the phone. Wang Qinglei's body gradually became stable. However, his face was still somewhat pale, and there was undisguised fear on his face. Okay, I understand. Wang Qinglei said slowly and silently put down the phone. What's the matter? His Majesty asked, pretending to be calm. Wang Qinglei glanced at everyone and didn't know what to say for a moment. He just asked everyone to speed up their actions, but in the blink of an eye, he suddenly heard the bad news from Zhongzhou State. Even with his will, he found it difficult to speak at this moment. Everyone, Wang Qinglei hesitated and said slowly, there are some problems in Beihai, and we are in trouble. But I don't think this is a reason for us to postpone the action. What trouble? Be more specific. His Majesty's tone was a little impatient. In one night, Zhongzhou State lost 4 major generals lurking in Beihai. Our people suffered heavy losses, and the elites of the superpowers were also greatly affected. Wang Qinglei smiled bitterly and said, I think you will soon see the battle damage. Chapter 837. Wang Qinglei spoke very quickly, which was completely beyond everyone's expectations. Before he could finish his sentence, the phones started ringing one after another. The representatives of several major forces present were still immersed in the news that Beihai had killed 4 major generals of Zhongzhou state overnight. When they heard that their forces had also suffered losses, the casualties came before they could even react. The meeting was completely suspended. Everyone picked up the phone almost at the same time, including Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Qinglei, who had already picked up the phone, looked a little scary. Opposite him, His Majesty still stood there. Silence was golden. He had no specific subordinates or forces. Knights Templars belonged to Moraid, Jifeng Sword Raining School belonged to Yagyu Kurumi, and the Jiang family of South America belonged to Jiang Guochu. So he seemed to have no battle damage. But from another perspective, every elite lost by Knights Templars, Jifeng Sword Raining School, and the Jiang family of South America could be regarded as his loss. The starlight cloud that enveloped his whole body was slightly fluctuating. His mood seemed to have recovered, but Wang Qinglei could clearly feel His Majesty's eyes on him. Wang Qinglei glanced at him. The moment their eyes met, His Majesty's eyes turned slightly and fell on Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Qinglei knew what it meant. In fact, even if Wang Xiaoyao, who had no way out, sat here, everyone still could not trust him 100%. Moreover, the timing of the Wang family of Beihai's attack was too coincidental, which made people inevitably suspect that someone had leaked the information. No one else was in a position to do so. Only Wang Xiaoyao seemed to have the most reason. In the hazy cloud, there was a flash of killing intent that no one had noticed. His Majesty's eyes that turned to Wang Xiaoyao quickly retracted and fell on Wang Qinglei again. His meaning was obvious. If Wang Xiaoyao was really the leak, as long as he had a clear suspicion, His Majesty would personally take action and keep him in this conference room forever without any evidence. His injury had not recovered, and it could even be said that it was far from recovery. But at this stage of the invincible realm, there were really too few people who could pose a threat to him. Wang Xiaoyao was not one of them. His Majesty could be sure that even if Wang Xiaoyao hid part of his strength, he would not be his opponent. Wang Qinglei shook his head imperceptibly. He did not doubt Wang Xiaoyao at all. Although a large part of the major forces' losses this time were related to Wang Xiaoyao's spies, it did not mean anything. Most importantly, Wang Xiaoyao and his spies did not know who the 4 major generals of Zhongzhou state were. And Beihai's actions were directly aimed at Zhongzhou state. There was something wrong in Zhongzhou state. Or in other words, some inexplicable problems that no one knew. Bastard. In the fierce roar, Moraid, the current head knight of the temple, suddenly stood up, his eyes cold. Wang Xingxiao, he's courting death. Qinglei's eyes were Wang Bai. Wang and Qinglei's. He remembered the loss of the 4 major generals. He also heard about the losses of the superpowers. In Knights Templars, a great knight commander of the half-step invincible realm died in the hands of Firmament, including more than 20 Knights Templars. Knights Templars were the absolute main force in Knights Templars. The threshold was the fire-flaming realm. No matter where they were, they could be regarded as super elites or middle-level cornerstones. The chief knight was also a half-step invincible realm expert. But there were also differences in the half-step invincible realm. He was facing a top half-step invincible realm expert like Firmament. There was no doubt about the result. Wang Xiaoyao. Shouldn't you give me an explanation? Tianhai Wuji slowly stood up, his hand subconsciously gripping the blade at his waist. Limitless Palace has quite a number of them. You were the one who hid the elites. You said that Huangfu Renjie was absolutely reliable. Reliable? Ha ha ha, tell me, which part is reliable? Huangfu Renjie had been captured as soon as the battle had begun, and the North Sea Legion was everywhere he had been during the past 2 months. Almost all of the elites of the Limitless Palace that Huangfu Renjie had encountered had been wiped out. What did that mean? Tell me, what do you mean? Wang Xiaoyao was also on the phone. His expression kept changing. Gloominess, astonishment, bewilderment, and finally helplessly cruelty. His Majesty saw all the changes in his expression and said slowly, "It's not him. It's not him just because you say so. Tianhai Wuji suddenly turned around and glared at His Majesty. He was not His Majesty's follower. In the face of such a huge loss, he would not be polite at all. Moraid narrowed his eyes and took a step forward subconsciously. He had always claimed to be the loyal dog at His Majesty's feet, loyal and devoted, and would not allow anyone to offend His Majesty. His Majesty waved his hand, glanced at Tianhai Wuji, and said slowly, "I accepted the Pope's coronation." Tianhai Wuji was stunned. "I've been observing His Highness Wang Xiaoyao's reaction just now." His Majesty continued to speak. Tianhai Wuji's brows loosened, and he finally gave a muffled snort. The Pope's coronation was absolutely famous in the dark world. It greatly strengthened the willpower and made the perception more acute. Under such circumstances, His Majesty could see Wang Xiaoyao's every move clearly from the corner of his eyes. At that moment, Wang Xiaoyao's reaction was exactly the same as that of the other superpowers. This couldn't be something that could be achieved by so-called acting skills. His Majesty could feel that Wang Xiaoyao really didn't want the alliance to suffer any big losses this time. Wang Xiaoyao raised his head and looked at His Majesty, who had spoken out to protect him. After a long time, he moved and said with a faint smile, "Should I thank you for saving my life?" "Tut tut, there are so many invincible realm experts. If they think it's me, I'm afraid I won't be able to leave today." "Your Highness, you're too kind." His Majesty chuckled. "That's right." Moraid nodded. "It's definitely not King Xiaoyao who should be glad to have saved his life, but a great grandmaster." His eyes were cold as he looked at Tianhai Wuji. "I can understand your feelings, but you must apologize for your rudeness to His Majesty just now. You've gone too far." Tianhai Wuji slowly stood up and held the hilt of the saber at his waist tightly. Moraid was indeed the strongest among all the invincible realm experts present, except for His Majesty, who people couldn't see through. But Tianhai Wuji was also not a weak person. In the last divine list, he was already in the top 10, and now he was not far from the peak of the invincible realm. He was a great grandmaster in the field of saber, and the saber was originally a fierce weapon. If they really fought to the death, he might not be afraid of Moraid. "Apologize and continue the meeting. If you don't apologize, I'll kill you, right here." Moraid was expressionless. Yagyu Kurasumi moved intentionally or unintentionally. Jiang Guochu also moved intentionally or unintentionally. Tianhai Wuji's face changed, and he was a little embarrassed. "Forget it, this is not the most important thing." His Majesty waved his hand, sat down again, knocked on the table, and said slowly, "It's impossible for His Highness Wang Xiaoyao to leak information. The people of Zhongzhou State can hide for so many years, and it's unlikely that they will be exposed in the near future. But it happened. Everyone, don't you think this feeling is very strange? Or rather, this feeling is very familiar?" This feeling was indeed very strange. But there were not many people who felt familiar with it. This kind of inexplicable but accurate intelligence is almost strange. It's like someone has foresight. Don't you think this pattern is familiar? His Majesty reminded softly. Samsara Palace. Jiang Guochu suddenly came to his senses. The intelligence system of Samsara Palace had always been the most inexplicable. For many things, their intelligence transmission speed was even slower than that of the ordinary second-tier forces in the Dark World. It was an ordinary second-tier force in the Dark World, but the speed and precise judgment of the intelligence of the superpowers were enough to make everyone's scalp numb. It was impossible to guard against them. No one knew how many spies the Samsara Palace had planted in the superpowers, or what they knew. Before the master of Samsara Palace died, the Samsara Palace had used its unique intelligence to set up one wonderful trap after another. Many times, the superpowers felt that they had won and were full of confidence, but the development of things was always led in a completely unfavorable direction because of an inexplicable trifle. It seemed like a coincidence. But the beginning of Samsara Palace, the establishment of the 12 Supermasters, and even the destruction of Night Spirit on the eve of the final battle of Heaven Capital were all caused by these seemingly inexplicable little things. And now, Samsara Palace. The Wang family of Beihai. Once the two superpowers joined forces, with the accurate and strange intelligence system of Samsara Palace, the Wang family of Beihai could set off a storm in Beihai in the shortest time. Qin Weibai again? Yagyu Kurumi frowned, and his tone was a little complicated. Even if the master of Samsara Palace hadn't died, most of the time, Qin Weibai had been controlling the operation of Samsara Palace. For the entire dark world, she was a rare and extraordinary woman. Almost all of the arrangements that made the superpowers and even the countries suffer were made by her. Her arrangements might not have been flawless, but at the beginning, they were absolutely exquisite. By the time everyone came to their senses, it was already too late. They could only struggle in the trap. The arrangements she made over and over again could be said to be magnificent. She left countless images to the whole dark world. Sharp, dreamy, perfect, and powerful. Countless people were crazy about her. For example, Wang Xiaoyao, who was sitting here today. For example, Jiang Qinyan, who had died. There were many, many people. But she finally appeared beside Li Tianlan. After the chaos in Eastern Europe, Samsara Palace disappeared, and Qin Weibai seemed to have restrained herself and went to the Lin clan. This time, was she secretly making a move again? The style seemed to be slightly different, but the general feeling did not change at all. Li Tianlan. Qin Weibai. Everyone's heart was extremely complicated. This man and woman, who were so deeply in love that everyone in the dark world knew, were names that no one present wanted to mention, and they were also opponents that they did not want to meet. No matter who it is. His Majesty's voice was calm and peaceful. It's meaningless to discuss these now. The most important thing is the battle damage. He sat down again and knocked on the table. Wuji Palace's layout in Beihai suffered heavy losses, almost 1/3. Tianhai Wuji's face was cold. Yagyu Kurumi froze, gritted his teeth, and said, "The loss of Jifeng Sword Raining School is similar to that of Wuji Palace." Jiang Guochu was a little confused. He hesitated for a moment and said in confusion, "Our loss is about 1/3. His Majesty glanced at Moraid. Moraid was smiling bitterly. He touched his nose and said, "What a coincidence. The loss of Knights Templars is also about 1/3. Everyone's face became extremely solemn. Wang Qinglei's body was completely tense. He gritted his teeth and said in a dry voice, "The loss of Zhongzhou State this time is about 1/3 of all its forces." Ha, 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 ha. Ha. His Majesty suddenly laughed. "Look, everyone, look, how interesting it is. It's a 1/3 loss. It's so interesting. Is this a coincidence?" He knocked on the table and whispered, "I didn't want to mention the goddess, but now it seems that our dear goddess wants to dominate the overall situation in the war in Beihai." Chapter 838. The quality of the elites sent by the superpowers to Beihai was top-notch, but in terms of quantity, there were not many of them. In particular, they only sent the first batch of elites into Beihai. The loss of this group of people would make the superpowers distressed, but it was not a serious blow. 1/3 of the first batch of elites was lost. This loss was not something they could not accept. But at this critical point where the war was about to be launched, the 1/3 loss meant a lot of things. Everyone wanted to be fast. They all wanted to launch a general attack on the Wang family of Beihai as soon as possible. But this 1/3 loss was tantamount to a knife slashing at their vitals. The importance of the first batch of elites from the superpowers to enter Beihai was self-evident. Their combat mission was even secondary. They had to integrate into Beihai as much as possible, gather intelligence, confirm the authenticity of the intelligence, make combat plans, choose assassination targets, retreat plans, and how to use the resources they had obtained to fight for more benefits when they succeeded. The first batch of elites had to have an expectation for everything. At the moment, the superpowers were indeed forming an alliance. But what about after everything in Beihai was settled? If Beihai won, there was no need to say anything. But they believed that Beihai would lose. If North Sea was bound to lose, Zhongzhou would have to take away a large portion of North Sea's huge profits. But even if it was just a small portion, it would be enough to strengthen the foundations of the various superpowers. Moreover, they could cooperate with Zhongzhou now. But after they won, they might dare to become enemies with Zhongzhou. Except for East Island, it might be difficult for other superpowers to take over the territory of Beihai. But on Mount Dibing, there were countless military technologies, pharmaceutical formulas, all kinds of rare resources in the laboratory, and the top talents in countless fields. These could be snatched. The first batch of elites was the beginning. But they had to use everything they had to make a final plan at the very beginning. Now, 1/3 of the first batch of elites was lost. The superpowers didn't say anything. Even Jiang Guochu and Yagyu Kurumi, who were their disciples, didn't say anything. In fact, one of the planners was included in the 1/3 loss of each of them. He was one of the core high-level members of the first batch of elites. This kind of person would not be a leader, but he often played the role of a military counselor. He was the kind of person who had a strong overall view and was the best at planning. There were such people in the first batch of elites of the superpowers. But now, such a person was killed overnight. Most importantly, due to selfishness, none of the major forces revealed this information. Even now, they still believed that the death of the planner was just a coincidence. No one could imagine that the intelligence of the Samsara Palace was so terrifying. The existence of the planner was very important to the superpowers. But under normal circumstances, such a person would not be deliberately paid attention to by other superpowers. It was more reliable to let them believe that they were the undercover agents of the Samsara Palace than to let them believe that the intelligence of the Samsara Palace was so detailed. However, every faction had lost 1/3 of their forces, which directly proved a fact. After the death of the master of Samsara Palace and the disappearance of the Samsara Palace, the goddess who had stayed in the Lin clan peacefully was still Li Tianlan's woman after all. And this woman, who had destroyed an era, had finally made her move at the most crucial moment. The loss of the first batch of elites meant many things. The most direct impact right now was that it directly affected the timing of their general attack. They had to allocate manpower to replenish the first batch of elites, and then slowly plan. It would take at least a month or more. Your Highness Wang Xiaoyao, everyone here should be more familiar with Qin Weibai. What do you think of her actions? His Majesty suddenly asked. His words were very euphemistic. But everyone present knew that His Majesty was talking about Wang Xiaoyao's crazy pursuit of Qin Weibai. From the first time Wang Xiaoyao saw Qin Weibai to the time Qin Weibai became Li Tianlan's woman, Wang Xiaoyao had pursued Qin Weibai for many years. Qin Weibai never gave him any chance. But as the King Xiaoyao of the Wang family of Beihai, with this identity, and Qin Weibai was in Zhongzhou state at that time, Wang Xiaoyao had more contact with her and knew more about her. Wang Xiaoyao had a faint smile on his face. After entering this conference room, he seemed to have this expression all the time. He had a faint smile, eccentric, and looked surly and cold. Dominate the overall situation? Well, if you also think that she wants to dominate the overall situation, I also think so as not to cause unnecessary misunderstanding. Wang Xiaoyao said lightly. What do you mean, Your Highness? Zhu asked, narrowing his eyes. Wang Xiaoyao ignored him. Everyone seemed to be deep in thought and did not pay attention to him. His Majesty did not speak either. The reason why Zhu could sit here was because he was the only invincible realm killer in the Dark World and because of his strong combat capability. But after all, he was just a new invincible realm killer. Before entering the invincible realm, a thunder-shocking realm expert, even a top assassin of half-step invincible realm, could not be qualified to sit here. Similarly, he was unlikely to be too deeply involved in some major events. But others were different. The two major sects in East Island. Knights Templars. The Jiang family of South America. These forces were all participants in countless chaotic situations in the past. They had dealt with Qin Weibai more than once, and they had fought against each other more than once. His Majesty said that Qin Weibai wanted to dominate the overall situation and was ridiculed by Wang Xiaoyao. Even His Majesty could not refute anything. Dominating the overall situation was just a statement that was good for their unity. But in fact, when did Qin Weibai ever dominate the overall situation? What she was best at was setting up a situation with all kinds of chaotic desires, pulling everyone into the quagmire, and guiding the direction of the situation in the early stage of the chaos, intentionally or unintentionally. Such a person was generally not popular in the dark world. But Qin Weibai was still a goddess. The only goddess. This actually showed that many people did not hate her too much. Hatred might be there. But they did not hate her. It wasn't just because of her outstanding beauty that could cause the downfall of a city. It was also because even if she could control the overall situation, she never tried to lead anything from beginning to end. The whole Samsara Palace was like this. Samsara Palace did not seem to have any ambition to dominate the dark world. In every major event and every chaotic situation, from the beginning to the end, Samsara Palace had always maintained the most clear goal. When Samsara Palace guided the initial situation to the situation they expected, the whole Samsara Palace would go all out at the first time. After accomplishing the initial goal, they would withdraw from the chaos without hesitation. Even if there were great benefits, they would not fight for it. Yes, because of benefits, greater benefits. Samsara Palace dragged countless superpowers and invincible realm experts into the chaos and regarded them as pawns that could be used. The superpowers did not mind this. In the dark world, everyone had the awareness of being a pawn. When Samsara Palace dragged them into the water, it also tossed the whole dark world into chaos. This could also let the superpowers see the benefits that were so great that they were willing to not withdraw. Then they began to make plans. They schemed against all kinds of opponents and made bigger plans. Then the plot became bigger and bigger. The frictions continued to escalate, and the losses became greater and greater. In the end, they even forgot what their original goal was. Samsara Palace was different. They only had one goal, and there was no so-called greater benefits. The dark world was turbulent, blood flowed like rivers, and corpses were everywhere. Samsara Palace did not care and did not look at it. What they cared about was the goal that they had set before the chaos. They did not forget their original goal. In this regard, Samsara Palace did not only well, but it was even rational to the extent of restraint. Moreover, in the countless chaos created by Samsara Palace, although it would drag other superpowers into the water, in the chaos, as long as they did not provoke Samsara Palace and their goals, they generally would not take the initiative to provoke others. All the losses of the superpowers were caused by the killing of each other because they had the necessary benefits. Was Samsara Palace the culprit? For the superpowers that had long adapted to the law of the jungle, the culprit was not anyone, but failure. Only failure. Winner takes all. Failure was the culprit. As long as they won, they could get greater benefits. If they failed, who else could they blame but themselves? More importantly, Samsara Palace seemed to be extremely crazy, but in every chaos, they did things in a very measured way and left some room for others. At least, every time the chaos caused by Samsara Palace, the final winner would not be Samsara Palace. Samsara Palace had made a lot of chaos, neither big nor small, and there were 3 big moves. More than 4 years ago, Master of Samsara Palace destroyed Night Spirit in Europe and got the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld. She did not move for other interests and directly retreated. In that battle, Dark Knights had the last laugh, completely stabilized their position as the leader of Northern Europe, and even vaguely suppressed the Vatican in Northern Europe. It was a win-win situation. Night Spirit was destroyed. Master of Samsara Palace challenged Gu Xingyun and created the final battle of Heaven Capital. The rise of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was a win-win situation for Samsara Palace and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Li Tianlan came back from the dead and completed his martial arts. Zhongzhou State also put down its guard because of the weakness of East Island. In the final battle of Heaven Capital, Samsara Palace was not the only one who gained something. The chaos in Eastern Europe seemed to be the most tragic. Most of the power of Samsara Palace was used on the Wang family of Beihai. Let Beihai fall into hell forever. The whole of Mormons became an empty city in the absolute domain. Countless elites were buried in foreign lands. The sword that crossed Mormons was so decisive. But even so, in the chaos in Eastern Europe, Samsara Palace made Li Tianlan the biggest beneficiary and still did not block all the ways for the Wang family of Beihai to take over Snow Country. It was just that Snow Country benefited Wang Xiaoyao in the end. This was Samsara Palace. Samsara Palace was so dedicated to its goal that it did almost everything. Such a force and such a goddess might make other forces feel as if they were facing a formidable enemy. But there were not many feelings of disgust. Because this was the dark world. His Majesty said that the goddess wanted to dominate the overall situation, which meant that she wanted all forces to stand on the opposite side of Qin Weibai. But after understanding Qin Weibai's behavior pattern, everyone was thinking about whether they could become the second winner in this battle. Because of the goddess's style of doing things, there was always room for leeway, or she was too focused to care about other things. But no matter what, there was always room for leeway. His Majesty squinted at the major forces with their own thoughts, shook his head subconsciously, and suddenly changed the topic. Why did Beihai suddenly attack Zhongzhou State? This is tantamount to a declaration of war, the kind that will not stop until one side is dead. Wang Xingxiao will not be so brainless or irrational. The leaders of the major forces who were thinking were stunned and looked at Wang Qinglei at the same time. His Majesty's question was also the key. If Zhongzhou State did nothing, how could Mount Dibing, which had been enduring, go crazy? Wang Qinglei's face was gloomy, but in the face of these collaborators, he had to give an explanation. Because of the termination plan. His voice was a little hoarse. Hoarse. What is the termination plan? His Majesty was a little puzzled. The Prime Minister personally launched the termination plan. He secretly searched for Wang Yuetong in the entire territory of Zhongzhou State, including Beihai Province, and killed her at all costs. Wang Qinglei said softly. He paused, looked at everyone's changed faces, and had to explain, because if we guessed correctly, in the negotiation between Wang Xingxiao and Li Tianlan, Wang Yuetong is likely to become the next patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. So the plan didn't succeed, but Wang Xingxiao knew it? His Majesty's tone was relieved, as if he had completely understood. Wang Qinglei did not speak. The result was already obvious. Stupid teammates. Jiang Guochu said with a smile. His voice was soft. It's so stupid. Tianhai Wuji snorted heavily. It does look like this. Wang Qinglei nodded. But have you thought about it? If the termination plan succeeds, how likely is it that Li Tianlan and Beihai will work together? Even if Wang Yuetong is dead, the possibility of their cooperation still exists, but it will be much smaller. But it doesn't matter. The dark world always talks about results, so this termination plan of Zhongzhou State is really stupid and hopeless. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that I really want to know how your Prime Minister is going to make up for such a serious mistake. It sounds like Zhongzhou State wants to cut off the connection between Li Tianlan and Beihai. Moraid lit a cigarette and said with a smile, but now, if Li Tianlan knows about this, he will be more determined to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai. It seems that his previous promise to Zhongzhou State can also be torn up, right? Li Tianlan won't know about this. Wang Qinglei said calmly. What? His Majesty was stunned and seemed to think it was a little ridiculous. I mean. Wang Qinglei's eyes swept across the audience, and he said word by word, Li Tianlan won't know about this. Regarding this war, the Prime Minister has obtained the highest authority. At this time, the army of Beijiang has begun to completely block the area within 100 miles of the desert prison. The land and air are all blocked. At the same time, we forcibly shut down all the communication signals of the desert prison. Gu Qianchuan, the first elder of Kunlun City and an expert of the Invincible Realm, will personally go to the desert prison. Now the desert prison is like an isolated island. No one can get close to the desert prison, and no one can leave. No news can be passed in. Everyone's heart trembled. Zhongzhou State's response was so resolute and fierce. Obviously, the Prime Minister had decided to fight. Even if it meant offending Li Tianlan to death. Your blockade, His Majesty took a deep breath and said, how long do you think it can be blocked? So be quick. Wang Qinglei said calmly, we must solve Mount Dibbing as soon as possible. At that time, without the help of Mount Dibbing, Li Tianlan will be easy to solve. You can block the desert prison, but can you block Tiannan? Li Tianlan doesn't know about it, but it doesn't mean that Emperor Dong's palace doesn't know about it. Jiang Guochu shook his head. So what if Emperor Dong's palace knows about it? Without Li Tianlan's order, what can they do? And even if they really dare to appear on the battlefield, Emperor Dong's palace without Li Tianlan is nothing to be afraid of. His Majesty nodded subconsciously, and then shook his head. Emperor Dong's palace without Li Tianlan is nothing to be afraid of? Yagyu Kurasumi said indifferently, what did Saint Wei Kunlun say? What did Situ Tsanyue of Sai City say? What did the Dongqing clan say? These are not the questions you should consider. Wang Qinglei said seriously, Zhongzhou State can guarantee that when the war breaks out, neither Wei Kunlun nor Situ Tsanyue will appear on the battlefield. As for the Dark Knights of Northern Europe, I can also guarantee that the woman Flaming Fire will not appear on that battlefield. His Majesty took over and said calmly. This was their initial deal. Flaming Fire, Saint, and Hidden God. They could be said to be Li Tianlan's greatest help now. Since the desert prison was blocked, Zhongzhou State could not let anyone close to Li Tianlan participate in the war. Saint and Hidden God would be solved by Zhongzhou State. As for the Dark Knights of Northern Europe, the Vatican and the Jiang family of South America would naturally allocate a part of their strength to contain the Dark Knights in Northern Europe. Wang Qinglei glanced at Zhu and continued, Zhongzhou State will block the desert prison with all its strength and isolate Li Tianlan. Although we have done something wrong, we also have enough compensation, as long as you act fast enough. In addition, Zhongzhou State has decided to launch the termination plan with all its strength. Before the war breaks out, I hope Your Highness can go back to Zhongzhou State with me. No problem. If there is news of Wang Yuetong, I will take action. Zhu laughed in a low voice, but I have a request. Wang Xiaoyao lowered his head. Wang Qinglei took a deep breath and said calmly, go ahead. After finding Wang Yuetong, let me play with her for a few days. The little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, ha ha ha, a woman of the chosen one. I haven't tasted her yet. And you promised me Tang Shi before. Oh, if she can be with Wang Yuetong. Ha, ha, rest assured, I will let such a superb woman die in despair. Deal. It seemed that Wang Qinglei did not want to hear him continue. He interrupted his laughter with a straight face and said straightforwardly. His Majesty glanced at Wang Xiaoyao playfully. Wang Xiaoyao lowered his head, picked up the teacup, and took a sip of tea in silence. Chapter 839. The long night was coming to an end. A hazy light shone on the huge field. Neat and clear slogans could be faintly heard from afar, getting further and further away, and finally becoming indistinct. A biting cold wind blew through the morning where day and night intertwined. The scarlet flag in front of the small building fluttered wildly. The old man, whose hair was already white but was still burly and looked extremely fierce, listened to the slogans from afar and stared at the flag in front of him, his expression incomparably solemn. He had been standing here for nearly half an hour. Countless expressions flashed across his face: hesitation, anger, hesitation, fear, determination, helplessness, doubt. All sorts of emotions. Even though half an hour had already passed, his expression was still constantly changing. Light footsteps sounded behind him. A charming young woman who looked to be around 30 years old walked into the study. She was wearing pajamas, but it was a rare tight-fitting style. It was not as loose and comfortable as normal pajamas, but the tight-fitting pajamas completely outlined her figure. Curvaceous and charming, this was a woman who seemed to be filled with temptation from head to toe. Intentionally or unintentionally, she vividly displayed all kinds of charm. The tall and mighty old man did not notice the young woman coming in. He was still frowning, hesitating about something. "What's wrong?" The young woman spoke softly, a pair of arms hugging the old man's waist from behind, her voice charming and languid. "Just now, it was a call from the Prime Minister." The old man spoke in a low voice. "Ah!" the young woman exclaimed, her charming face rubbing against the old man's back. She giggled and said, "The Prime Minister personally called you. Is it because you're going to be promoted? To Yuzhou? Or the Southeast?" "Nonsense, you're just thinking about my promotion." The old man turned around and laughed softly, pinching the young woman's face dotingly. The old man stroked the woman's hair, not saying anything. The two of them were not so-called lovers. They were a proper married couple. In the northern borderline, the matter of the northern borderline military commander Huang Tong marrying a mistress had always been a legend in certain hidden circles. Pang Tong was already 56 years old this year. His wife used to be his secretary, and the two had been married for 3 years. 3 years ago, his wife was 25 years old, only 2 years older than Huang Tong's son. Their marriage had caused a lot of rumors. However, after a few years of marriage, the two seemed to be harmonious and sweet. Under the manipulation of some people, the mockery and ridicule had decreased a lot. Commander Huang really loved his wife very much. Thinking about the promotion she had been longing for, he narrowed his eyes and said softly, "But what you said isn't wrong. There is indeed a chance for a promotion." "Where to?" The young woman's eyes sparkled. "Yu Province, Southeast Province, Nanhua Province, or even the military headquarters." The old man subconsciously opened his mouth, then immediately realized that there were some things that he shouldn't say. He shook his head and softly said, "Go back to sleep, I have something to deal with." The young woman blushed and stammered, You don't exercise anymore?" "I'll exercise again tonight." Huang Tong shook his head, put on his military uniform, and began to make a call. The young woman kissed him, then turned and walked out of the study. When she was about to leave the study, Huang Tong's dignified voice sounded from behind. "Oh Yang, come to my office right now." The young woman's footsteps paused slightly, then she quickened her pace. From an angle that her husband couldn't see, her eyes were a little flickering. Oh Yang. There might be more than one person with the surname Oh Yang in the entire Beijiang military region, but there was only one person who was qualified for Huang Tong to call in person. The commander of the 43rd Army of Zhongzhou State stationed in Beijiang. Major General Ouyang Pengfei. He was the well-deserved #1 expert in Beijiang of Zhongzhou State, and also a super soldier personally trained by Zhongzhou State. The young woman looked back at Huang Tong, smiled sweetly, and gently closed the door. Huang Tong wore a military uniform and sat in a chair. Through the window, he looked at the blurry scarlet flag outside, and his face became more and more solemn. Ouyang Pengfei flew fast. His main duty was to lead the 43rd Army of Zhongzhou State. But he still held the position of deputy commander of the Beijiang military region. His residence was not far from Huang Tong's, so they could be said to be neighbors. When he hurried into the study, Huang Tong had completely calmed down. He walked out from behind the desk, sat on the sofa, waved his hand casually, and said tiredly, "Sit down." Ouyang Pengfei sat opposite Huang Tong and was a little confused. "Commander?" "Yes." Huang Tong nodded lightly. The relationship between the two was extremely close, and they were both capable generals of the Prince Group. There was no need for too much courtesy between them. "The Prime Minister just talked to me on the phone. He asked you to come here to give you a message." "Go ahead." Ouyang Pengfei's expression suddenly became serious. A few hours ago, Wang Xingshao, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, launched a cleanup operation in Beihai. He personally issued an order that from today on, anyone who enters the border of Beihai without permission will be killed. All foreign combatants and intelligence personnel who don't belong to Beihai or even Mount Dibbing are included in the cleanup scope. Before I spoke to the Prime Minister on the phone, 4 major generals of Zhongzhou state had died under Wang Xingxiao's order. Huang Tong said flatly. Ouyang Pengfei raised his eyebrows little by little. Smack. He slammed his palm on the sofa and said furiously, "Bastard. Beihai is the territory of Zhongzhou state. Our general can go anywhere in Zhongzhou state. Who gave him the courage to attack a general of Zhongzhou state? It's just." His voice was trembling with anger. In the end, he kept repeating, "Bastard, bastard." 4 major generals were killed in one night. Ouyang Pengfei himself was a major general of Zhongzhou state. Although he didn't know much about the 4 major generals who died in the line of duty, he also felt sorry for them when he heard the news. No matter what, the Wang family of Beihai was just a wealthy family in Zhongzhou state. What kind of behavior was it to publicly kill a general of Zhongzhou state? It's treason. Ouyang Pengfei said angrily, "The Wang family of Beihai should be killed." Yes, but things have come to this point. The Prime Minister also made some mistakes. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that everything the Prime Minister has done is for the future of Zhongzhou state. Huang Tong said. Ouyang Pengfei nodded and said in a deep voice, "I understand." Huang Tong glanced at him and hesitated again. Ouyang Pengfei was keenly aware of Huang Tong's hesitation. He smiled and seemed to understand something. "Commander, if there's any military order, just say it. I'll obey any order. Do you need me to go to Beihai to fight?" "I have no problem." He was a top superior of the half-step invincible realm cultivated by Zhongzhou state. His real strength might not reach the level of the invincible realm, but it wasn't weak either. If they wanted to target Beihai, an expert like him would definitely be called up. Ouyang Pengfei's eyes were calm and fearless. "Aren't you afraid of death?" Huang Tong also laughed. "Of course I am, but it's not a reason for me to retreat." Ouyang Pengfei said with a smile, "I volunteer to fight. I hope Commander will allow me to go to Beihai to fight." "No." Huang Tong shook his head. "Your mission is not in Beihai, but here." "Here?" Ouyang Pengfei frowned. "Beihai is crucial, but so is Li Tianlan," Huang Tong said. Ouyang Pengfei's face gradually changed, and he looked a little stiff. The possibility of Li Tianlan cooperating with Beihai is very high, which is what Zhongzhou state doesn't want to see. If we can destroy the cooperation between them, it's the best, but if we can't, Huang Tong took a deep look at Ouyang Pengfei. Anyway, Li Tianlan can't appear on the battlefield now, and he can't even leave the prison. Ouyang Pengfei's smile disappeared, and it was almost invisible. His eyes were a little evasive. "So, the Prime Minister's order for you is to lead all the members of the 43rd Division to block everything around the desert prison at all costs. No one is allowed to enter or leave. The Beijiang military region will transfer elites to fully cooperate with your blockade operation." Huang Tong looked at Ouyang Pengfei's eyes and said word by word. Ouyang Pengfei couldn't laugh at all. Block the desert prison. Block Li Tianlan. This task was like a huge stone. His heart continued to sink, so much so that he almost couldn't breathe. This is, against Emperor Dong's palace and the one in the prison? Ouyang Pengfei's face was a little pale. Huang Tong didn't speak. His face was also a little pale. They were not afraid to offend the Wang family of Beihai at this time. But they really didn't want to offend Li Tianlan. Against the Wang family of Beihai, that was the action of Zhongzhou state. Countless forces were involved. They were mixed in, inconspicuous. Moreover, the Wang family of Beihai was more disciplined, so they would be relatively safe. But against Li Tianlan, they were in Beijiang. No. There would be a second force. Carrying out Chen Fangqing's order meant that they were the only force against Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was not the Wang family of Beihai. He gave Zhongzhou State the impression that he was extremely crazy. Whether it was fighting against external forces or internal forces, he was extremely crazy and ruthless. The two tragedies of the Tang family and the Qi family in Yuzhou had fully explained what would happen if they angered Li Tianlan. At this time, in the face of this order, both Ouyang Pengfei and Huang Tong were a little scared. They really didn't dare to do it. But they had to do it. Huang Tong was very clear that Chen Fangqing had taken the lead in all the actions against the Wang family of Beihai. And in the shortest time, he got the support of most of the forces of the Prince Group. The Prince Group didn't have a good impression of the Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai. If there was a chance, they would not be polite. This was like a big gamble. The Prince Group thought they had enough chips and confidence to sit on the gambling table. Chen Fangqing might be thinking about the future of Zhongzhou State. But many people were also thinking about the future of the Prince Group. It was foreseeable that once the Wang family of Beihai was really defeated, even if the Southeast Group didn't fall apart, its vitality would be greatly damaged and it would become the weakest group today. This meant unimaginable benefits and right to speak. At that time, Chen Fangqing and the Prince Group, as the leaders of everything, would be rich and crazy. This kind of harvest was enough to make them the first group in Zhongzhou State, or even the only group. At present, targeting Beihai and blocking Li Tianlan was the will of the entire Prince Group. Huang Tong and Ouyang Pengfei couldn't refuse at all. Even if they didn't want to do it, they had to obey the order. They were all senior officers of Zhongzhou State. Disobedience was equivalent to desertion. The result would not be better than offending Li Tianlan. Pengfei, I know you're in a difficult position. To be honest, I'm the same. Huang Tong said softly, but we have no choice. Ouyang Pengfei smiled bitterly and didn't know what to say. Execute it. Huang Tong handed him a cigarette, sighed, and said softly, as long as the blockade is successful, my position will be yours in the future. And I'm sure that this position will not be your end. The Prince Group also knew that blocking Li Tianlan would put Huang Tong and Ouyang Pengfei in a difficult position, so they promised huge benefits. As long as the blockade was successful, in a short time, the two would definitely be promoted. And this was not the end, just the beginning. Of course the position of commander is good, but you have to be alive to sit in this position. Ouyang Pengfei said bitterly. What you said makes sense, but don't forget, this is the will of the whole group. You can give up this position, but you don't have the courage to block Li Tianlan. Do you have the courage to fight against the whole group? Ouyang Pengfei was silent for a long time, and then said softly, how long do I need to block the prison? The fastest is 1 month, the slowest is 3 months. Huang Tong took a drag on the cigarette. There should be a clear result in this period of time. Ouyang Pengfei scratched his hair irritably. What about the military area? Commander, how many people can you give me? This time, Huang Tong didn't hesitate at all and said directly, you can take as many people as you need. All members of the 43rd Army will take action. In addition, you can name everything in the Beijiang military region, and I will cooperate. I only have one request. Completely block the desert prison. No one is allowed to enter or leave. Pengfei, remember, this is a war. We can only win, not lose. Ouyang Pengfei was silent for a long time, and then asked, what if someone breaks in? People from the Wang family of Beihai, or people from Emperor Dong's palace? Huang Tong looked at him expressionlessly, and repeated again, remember, this is a war. At the same time he said this. Outside the study, in the master bedroom not far from him, the charming young woman took off her pajamas, lay on the bed again, and took out her mobile phone. She hid under the quilt, composed a text message with a calm expression, and then completely deleted her edited text message. There was a desert in Beijiang. There were also snow mountains. The flying snow fell in Kunlun City. In Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun picked up his mobile phone, looked at the text message sent on the mobile phone, and narrowed his eyes. Huang Tong made an appointment with Ouyang Pengfei. It seems that he has made up his mind. What choice does he have? Gu Qianchuan sat opposite to Gu Xingyun and shook his head. He really has no choice. Gu Xingyun held the mobile phone and looked at Gu Qianchuan thoughtfully. But you have. What are you going to choose? Chapter 840. Gu Qianchuan sat opposite Gu Xingyun. In the past 2 years, he had lost a lot of weight. His hair had turned white, and one of his sleeves was fluttering in the wind. He looked old and miserable. Gu Xingyun's days of recuperation might not be miserable, but they were definitely not easy. Even though he was also an expert of the invincible realm, as Gu Xingyun fell silent, Gu Qianchuan still faced unimaginable pressure. Li Shi was gone in Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun slept most of the time. Under the endless pressure, Gu Qianchuan already had the idea that he might not be able to support Kunlun City. His ambition gradually converged, so his relationship with Gu Xingyun became much more harmonious. Hearing Gu Xingyun's words, Gu Qianchuan looked up at him and smiled strangely. I can choose. What can I choose? Do nothing but wait for death? Gu Xingyun lowered his head and rubbed the teacup in his hand. After a while, he shook his head and said, things are not that bad. That can only be said that you underestimated the thoughts of Li Huacheng and Chen Fangqing. Gu Qianchuan said unceremoniously. The relationship between them became stable again, and their words were no longer polite to each other. He grabbed a cigarette with his only arm, flicked his fingers, lit the cigarette, and said, how is your injury? It's not difficult to recover, but it will take time. Gu Xingyun said quietly. How long? To what extent can it be recovered? Gu Qianchuan stared at Gu Xingyun's eyes seriously. Gu Xingyun lowered his head, took a sip of tea, and narrowed his eyes slightly. No one knew how much he had gained during this period of recuperation. Even he did not know. Before he was injured, he was only close to the peak of the invincible realm. Now the only thing that Gu Xingyun could be sure of was that if he recovered from his injury, he could at least set foot in the domain of the peak of the invincible realm. As for how far he could go, he did not know. But at least, he frowned and smiled. Far better than before. What about time? Gu Qianchuan asked lightly. Gu Xingyun subconsciously touched the position of his heart, and a gloomy look flashed in his eyes. He was lucky not to die when he was not at the peak of the invincible realm and suffered the full blow of the murderous weapon-setting sun at a close distance. Even after nearly 2 years, his injury still needed time to recover slowly. He thought of Situ Tsangyue. At that time in Lin'an, the woman almost completely aimed the setting sun at his chest and fired. Sooner or later, he would make her pay a painful price. It's not important. Gu Xingyun said lightly, I do need some time, but so does Li Tianlan. He can't be faster than me. Even Li Tianlan a year ago. With the 13th floor, he wouldn't be much weaker than you at your peak. Gu Qianchuan shook his head and mocked, if not, how could Li Huacheng and Chen Fangqing have the idea of letting him replace Kunlun City? The muscles on Gu Xingyun's face twitched fiercely, but he didn't speak. Let Emperor Dong's palace replace Kunlun City and let Li Tianlan become the new god of war of Zhongzhou State. This was the real idea of Li Huacheng and Chen Fangqing. If Li Tianlan refused to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai, this idea might have become a reality that was being implemented now. This idea was hidden. But the Special Warfare Group was one of the 6 groups anyway. As the leaders of the Special Warfare Group, how could Gu Qianchuan and Gu Xingyun not hear any news? Up to now, Kunlun City's complaints about the president and the prime minister aside, at least they and Li Tianlan had really formed a relationship that could not coexist. Kunlun City could not allow a person who could replace itself at any time to appear. With the development of Li Tianlan's Emperor Dong's palace, it was impossible to let go of Kunlun City, a huge obstacle. Coupled with the grudges of the past, both sides had become enemies that would not rest until one of them was dead. So when Chen Fangqing wanted to block the desert prison, the first place he thought of was Kunlun City. At his current age, this is his limit. Gu Xingyun's voice was cold. In a short time, he can't even break through the real invincible realm, let alone the peak of the invincible realm. His physical quality in his early 20s can't bear the power of the peak of the invincible realm. At his age, it's a little difficult for him to practice the thunder-shocking scripture. Li Tianlan himself must be very clear about this. His physical quality is far from the peak state. It's a pipe dream for him to enter the invincible realm in 3 to 5 years. His words were very confident. This was not only the confidence that Li Tianlan could not enter the invincible realm in 3 to 5 years. Similarly, he was sure that his injury could be completely recovered in 3 to 5 years. So you have a choice. There's no need to fight with your life now. You're not waiting for death. You're now the acting governor of Kunlun City, so you can completely refuse Chen Fangqing's request. If you really want to deal with the situation, just send a few people to the desert to guard. Gu Xingyun said slowly. Seeing Wang Xingxiao's strength at the risk of fighting and Li Tianlan's domineering way of killing people at will, Gu Xingyun's thinking was slowly changing with the increasingly arrogant style of the younger generation. When he recovered from his injury, he would be at the peak of the invincible realm. Just as Li Tianlan once boasted. On that day, Kunlun City was the overall situation of Zhongzhou State. At that time, he would be the first to find Li Tianlan and kill Li Tianlan at all costs and in spite of all obstacles. At worst, he would go to the desert prison for a few years. When he came out, Kunlun City would still be Kunlun City. Gu Qianchuan's face was cold. There was a flash of hesitation in his eyes. Then he shook his head and said in a low voice, "I'm not as generous as you. I've been like this since I was a child. I only know that we're helping the parliament now. It's the general trend. We have the advantage. If we don't seize this opportunity, we're rejecting the parliament. If you can't suppress Li Tianlan in the future, the parliament won't help us." Gu Xingyun looked at Gu Qianchuan silently. There was an emotion of understanding in his eyes. "So, you've made up your mind? Is the news of Silver Phoenix reliable?" Gu Qianchuan asked. "Of course." Gu Qianchuan nodded. "She's an elite of Phoenix Pavilion. It won't be a problem for her to control Huang Tong. To be honest, with Silver Phoenix's condition, if Huang Tong hadn't been in Beijiang, he wouldn't have gotten Silver Phoenix at all. But now it's different. If the action of blocking the desert is successful, Huang Tong will at least be a member of parliament in the future. In this way, we won't treat Silver Phoenix badly. In that case, I'll guard the desert with the 13th Army." Gu Qianchuan touched his empty sleeves and thought of the young man who cut off his arm. A haze flashed through his eyes. He didn't want to let go of this opportunity. It was a win-win situation for the parliament and Kunlun City to block Li Tianlan with the power of Zhongzhou State. Moreover, he was not at ease with Gu Xingyun. No one could be sure that Gu Xingyun could really suppress Li Tianlan in the future. It would be best if he could kill Li Tianlan with the help of this incident. It was not impossible. Because this was a war. Take a few more people there. Gu Xingyun glanced at him and said quietly, "If you meet Li Tianlan, be careful. Be careful means retreat if you can. Now you should not be his opponent." Gu Qianchuan sneered. "That was me 2 years ago. You can make progress. Even if I lose an arm, I can't stay in the same place all the time." Gu Xingyun nodded, picked up the teacup, and said, "Have a nice trip." Gu Qianchuan did not speak. His figure moved and disappeared in front of Gu Xingyun in an instant. Gu Xingyun sat alone in his yard, holding a teacup and watching the wind and snow dancing in the sky. The darkness gradually began to dissipate. Gu Xingyun finished the tea in the cup and put it down. A slight and light footstep appeared in his perception and gradually approached his yard. Gu Xingyun was stunned. A warm smile vaguely appeared at the corner of his mouth, and he sat back again. No one knocked on the door. The gate of the yard was gently pushed open from the outside. A girl in a long skirt came in. There seemed to be a fog in the yard. It was as light as sand. It was a kind of hazy and ethereal aura. Ethereal, smart, dreamy, and cold. The whole yard seemed to be in a trance with the appearance of the girl. Some people's bodies seemed to truly have immortal energy. At a glance, it was as if they didn't belong to the mortal world, not eating the food of the mortal world. She wasn't arrogant, she was calm and quiet, but it was as if she was always standing outside the mortal world, cold, quiet, and perfect. Gu Xingyun quietly looked at the perfect girl who was like a fairy. His eyes were full of love, like a father seeing his own daughter. Teacher. The girl came to Gu Xingyun and bowed slightly. Silly girl, how many times have I said that when there is no one around, you can call me foster father. You can call me father directly. Gu Xingyun reached out and touched the girl's head. He said softly, "Why do you get up so early today?" "I'm meditating." The girl did not avoid Gu Xingyun's hand, but she was not close to him. Of course, she was not alienated either. It seemed that she was born to be cold. She looked only 14 or 15 years old, but her every move was with an indescribable calmness. "If there is anything you don't understand, tell me." Gu Xingyun laughed, and his eyes became softer. Without Li Shi in Kunlun City, he seemed to have intentionally or unintentionally let go of Li Qingcheng. Instead, he was particularly fond of this girl who had just come to the mountain for less than 2 years. He taught her the martial arts of Kunlun City without reservation. Compared with Li Qingcheng, the girl enjoyed the real princess treatment in Kunlun City. "It's okay," the girl said quietly. She looked at Gu Xingyun with her ethereal and dreamy eyes, and said softly, "Teacher, why did Second Master suddenly go out of the city?" "Second Master has something to deal with. I'm injured, so I can only trouble him." The girl said yes. Looking at the falling snow in front of her, she was lost in thought. Her eyes were clear, but there was a yearning in the depths of her eyes. Gu Xingyun's heart moved slightly, and he smiled softly. "Xian Yan, do you also want to go out of the city and have a look?" The darkness was about to dissipate. In the morning light with falling snow, the girl named Gu Xianyan lowered her head and said softly, "I don't know. After you go out of the city, where do you want to go and what do you want to do?" Gu Xingyun continued to ask. Gu Xianyan still shook her head and said softly, "I don't know." "Well," Gu Xingyun pondered and smiled. Not knowing is a good thing, but also not a good thing. Since you don't know, you might as well go out and have a look. Maybe you will know what you want to do. He flicked the girl's white forehead and smiled. "After dawn, I will arrange someone to send you out. No one will stop you if you want to do anything. But you can't get tired of the people who protect you. You are the princess of Kunlun City. It's not proper to have no one following you. Do you understand?" A little joy flashed on the girl's delicate face, and she nodded hard. She looked at the gloomy sky above Kunlun City and whispered, "Teacher, it's dawn." Gu Xingyun looked at her expression and could not help laughing. He touched the teacup and whispered, "Yes, it's dawn." When it was dawn, Gu Qianchuan officially left Kunlun City. In the courtyard of Beijiang Military Region, Ouyang Pengfei left Huang Tong's office. The 43rd Army near the desert began to assemble quickly. This morning, in Kunlun City, which seemed to have been forgotten by many people, Gu Xingyun took Gu Xinyan's small hand and told her many times. He supported his unhealed body and sent her out of Kunlun City step by step. Chapter 841. The morning sun rose in the desert. The night passed completely. The 43rd Corps of Zhongzhou State directly took a shortcut into the desert when the sky just lit up. The 43rd Corps was not as famous as the Border Control Corps, but no matter how strong the Border Control Corps was, it was impossible to suppress the edge of all the other armies in Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State had millions of soldiers. Even if the 600,000 soldiers were not included in the Corps, it was still not difficult to find some battle-worthy troops. The 43rd Corps was a rapid response force stationed in Beijiang all year round. Many times, the problems it dealt with were equally sensitive. Even in the entire Zhongzhou state, the 43rd Corps could be said to be one of the elite armies with the most combat effectiveness. Whether in terms of personnel quality or military equipment, it could be regarded as a real ace. The most important thing was that the 43rd Corps was probably the most experienced army in the entire Zhongzhou state when it came to fighting in the desert environment. The 43rd Corps was the primary candidate to block the desert prison. The helicopter hovered over the desert. A large number of armored vehicles and main battle tanks advanced in a straight line in the desert. The military transport vehicles that had been specially modified to adapt to the desert environment moved majestically. The sun shone on the vast expanse of yellow sand. The army of nearly 20,000 people advanced continuously, bringing with them an indomitable aura of iron and blood. Ouyang Pengfei looked down at this scene and suddenly felt that it was a little tragic. Huang Tong had decided to completely execute the Prime Minister's order and block the desert prison at all costs. So his 43rd Corps was just a vanguard. Within 8 hours, at least 2 heavy armored corps suitable for desert combat would form a second blockade along the road of the 43rd Corps. This time, Huang Tong almost mobilized more than half of the strength of the Beijiang military region. In order to block the area within 100 miles around the prison, the Beijiang military region dispatched at least 100,000 people. The mobilization of 100,000 people, just thinking about the huge logistics transportation, was enough to let people know Huang Tong's determination. At the same time, it could also be seen that they were serious and afraid of this battle. There was nothing to fear in the desert prison. But no one dared to ignore Li Tianlan. Similarly, no one could ignore the giant group around Li Tianlan. If this was a war, the blood would be shed in the desert. But at this moment, the top management of Zhongzhou State, the Academy, the Southeast, the Crown Prince, and the 4 groups of wealthy families were also fighting. Li Tianlan was already in the teeth of the storm. Ouyang Pengfei, on the other hand, was pushed to this position. He was the vanguard in this war. If he won, he would naturally work hard and make great contributions. But what if he failed? He would probably be smashed to pieces. It couldn't quell the anger of Li Tianlan and the giant group. Ouyang Pengfei shuddered. In fact, he had never met Li Tianlan, at least not face to face. However, he had a good personal relationship with Qi Mulan. Every time he thought of Li Tianlan, he would think of the miserable end of the Qi family. And the person who had caused the tragedy of the Qi family had unconsciously become a shadow in his heart. He really didn't want to provoke Li Tianlan, but standing in this position, he had no choice. No, perhaps there was still a choice. His only choice was to go all out and lock down the desert prison. Only success was allowed, failure was not allowed. Ouyang Pengfei looked down at the military map in the cabin. On the map was the terrain of the desert with a radius of 100 miles. It was a stretch of yellow sand that was extremely flat. It was so simple and boring that it looked like a forbidden land. However, at this time, this land of danger was divided into countless pieces, marked with different colors on the map, and marked with numbers. Although this map, which had been hastily made, was crude, it was extremely effective in this kind of simple terrain. At present, our goal is the 4th zone. It's about 70 miles away from the desert prison, which is the most suitable blockade area. If we want to further narrow down the blockade area, we can advance about 3 kilometers in the 4th zone, which is the limit. Beside Ouyang Pengfei, the chief of staff of the 43rd Army stared at the map in front of him and said slowly, "How many kilometers can we advance without considering the third eye and the heavenly arrow?" Ouyang Pengfei looked at the map in front of him and said calmly, "General, we have no choice but to consider the third eye and the heavenly arrow. Even if Li Tianlan dares to attack us, he may not dare to use the sky arrow base. But the Eye of the Sky is a fully automatic military base with a killing range of 60 miles. Once the Eye of the Sky is fully opened, no one who enters this area can survive. Don't doubt Li Tianlan's courage. Although I haven't met him, many people say that he is a madman. Once we enter the killing range of the Eye of the Sky, it's impossible for him to not attack. In a fully automatic military base, he can easily explain that there is a code error or some other reason. No matter how ridiculous it is, as long as he says it, people will be willing to believe it. The chief of staff shook his head and said, I know what you mean, but Zhongzhou State has frozen most of the commands of the Third Eye in advance. Li Tianlan can't use the Third Eye system. Ouyang Pengfei said. If it can be frozen, it can be turned on. The chief of staff hesitated and said in a low voice, General, don't forget who the current standing minister of the army headquarters is. His authority is enough for him to turn on all the frozen weapon systems. Similarly, he has enough strength to do this. The Dongqing clan is the richest family in the Zhongzhou state military. Who knows how many chess pieces they have in the military? Well, even if Dongqing Wudi doesn't do it, what kind of place is the desert prison? The most dangerous criminals are imprisoned there. No one can be sure whether there are cutting-edge super hackers there. If Zhongzhou State can freeze the system, maybe the desert prison can be unlocked. To say the least, if Dongqing Wudi restarts the system, it will be explained to the public that it's the dying struggle of the prisoners in the prison. Li Tianlan killed them and handed them over. This is an explanation, but our brothers who sacrificed themselves died in vain. Ouyang Feipeng gritted his teeth and said nothing. We have to confirm one thing. Zhongzhou State has no intention to kill Li Tianlan, even the parliament. It's not a matter of whether they want to kill him or not, but whether they can kill him or not. Taking action against Beihai is always the most important thing. But neither the president nor the prime minister can be crazy enough to start a war with the Southeast Group and the Prince Group at the same time. So the blockade this time is just to limit Li Tianlan. At least I haven't received an order to limit the supplies of the desert prison so far. The chief of staff said softly, so if I'm right, the parliament will make a big move against Beihai in the near future. It won't take too long, so we won't blockade the desert for too long. When the matter in Beihai is over, the parliament will have a talk with Li Tianlan, and he hesitated and didn't speak for a while. Go on. Ouyang Pengfei said quietly. We might as well wait and see. The chief of staff said calmly. Wait and see. Ouyang Pengfei smiled bitterly. We are at the forefront of this conflict. How can we wait and see? We are indeed very far ahead at present, but it's not a bad thing. At least if someone wants to rush in from the outside, they will first face the troops behind us. As for the direction of the desert prison, I don't know what happened to make the prime minister give such an order, but Li Tianlan won't know it at night. For a while, he shouldn't respond too violently. Even if he does take action, there are still people in front of us who can shelter us. The chief of staff smiled and said softly, His Highness Gu Qianchuan should be coming, right? Chapter 842. About the fairy face in Kunlun City, wasn't it written in Volume 4, Chapter 41, Xian Xuanzi took it from Mormons. The 43rd Army was moving. The Beihai Corps was also moving. From beginning to end, the desert prison remained silent. Beihai Province also remained silent. Hence, when news of the movements of the North Sea Legion and the 43rd Division reached the central continent, the first people to panic weren't the people in the desert prison or the North Sea Province. Instead, the first people to panic were the leaders in the central continent's upper echelons. This year, tomorrow was destined to be the most sensitive time. It happened once every 10 years, like reincarnation. These leaders had long been used to such changes, but as the situation developed, some conflicts became more and more intense. Until the 43rd Army began to blockade the desert prison, some immovable big shots in the upper echelons of Zhongzhou State were shocked to find that the whole situation had developed to the point of life and death. The end of this term was the beginning of the next term. The transfer of power from the old to the new was related to the fate of Beihai Province and the future of Emperor Dong's palace. It was no exaggeration to say that the change of power, Beihai, and Emperor Dong's palace had been closely linked because it involved the Southeast, the Crown Prince, the Academy, and the Giant Group. Among the 6 groups in Zhongzhou State, the 4 strongest groups were involved and became the 2 sides of the game. The Beihai group and the Special Warfare group also had their own space to move. All the people in Zhongzhou State who were qualified to participate in this matter had already participated. Everyone had different pursuits, but the results they hoped for were the same. Li Huacheng and Chen Fangqi might be thinking about the future of Zhongzhou State, but more people were thinking about the possible benefits in the future. The game of Beihai was the key before the change of power. If Beihai won, the Academy and the Prince Group would naturally lose a lot of strength. If Beihai lost, in the next 10 years, their power would shrink again until they completely disappeared in Zhongzhou State. Many people were silently participating and silently observing. Observing the aggressiveness of the Prince Group and the academics. Observing the compromise and retreat of the Southeast Group and the Prince Group quietly. Almost everyone who didn't know the inside story thought that the situation had formed a delicate balance. But the balance was completely broken overnight. The Beihai Corps searched the entire province. The 43rd Army directly blockaded the desert prison. If it was a game before, then, right now, such a direct and forceful style was almost equivalent to a war. The War of Zhongzhou State. In the hundreds of years since the founding of the country, there had been countless changes of power in Zhongzhou State, but there had never been a war. What about this time? As the actions of Zhongzhou State and Beihai became more and more intense, the entire Zhongzhou State began to get nervous. In the office of the executive minister of the army headquarters building, Dongqing Wudi smoked silently, squinting at a report from the Beijiang military region in his hand. The report was very short, and the content was even simpler. It said that the 43rd Division had joined forces with 2 other heavy armored divisions to conduct a large-scale exercise. Dongqing Wudi did not look at this kind of serious nonsense. He mainly looked at a signature below. It was Li Huacheng's personal signature. The president of Zhongzhou State had always been the minister of the army headquarters, but most of the time it was just a nominal title. The executive minister presided over the daily work of the army headquarters. Reports like the one in the northern borderline were usually transmitted to the executive minister first, and then continued to be reported. But this time, it was the complete opposite. Without Dongqing Wudi's knowledge, the report from Beijiang had fallen into Li Huacheng's hands. After Li Huacheng signed it, the report came to the army headquarters. In other words, Li Huacheng agreed to this maneuver. Under such circumstances, Dongqing Wudi's opinion was no longer important. When the president had clearly expressed his opinion, even if he had a different opinion, he could not say it, otherwise, he would be immature. Therefore, he frowned slightly and raised the document in his hands several times, but finally put it on the table helplessly. This document is a little interesting. Yi Dongqing picked up the document, glanced at it, and said with a smile. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him, shook his head, and said nothing. At present, the president's attitude seems to be a little vague. Yi Dongqing looked down at the signature on the document and suddenly said. In the general direction, his position will not change, but the prime minister is a little irrational now. He can even be said to be crazy. Naturally, the president will not accompany him to the end. Dongqing Wudi said blandly. Although Li Huacheng still signed his name on the document, the news that the president and the prime minister appeared in Dragon Lake Park at the same time last night also came out. All kinds of signs showed that the cooperation between the president and the prime minister had cracked. But no matter what, at this time, Li Huacheng would still support Chen Fangqi. The situation is in our favor. Yi Dongqing said with certainty. Dongqing Wudi snorted softly and said with some dissatisfaction, we still need some evidence. We just arrested him last night. Even if we interrogate him, it will take some time. Yi Dongqing spread his hands helplessly. But don't worry, we will get what we should get soon. When the evidence is put in front of the president, what do you think his attitude will be? Li Huacheng knew that Chen Fangqi had started the termination plan. The Wang family of Beihai also knew. But now there was no evidence that could directly prove that the termination plan was Chen Fangqi's doing. Sometimes evidence was important, and sometimes it was not at all. When the strength of the two sides was almost equal, as long as they found the evidence that Chen Fangqi started the termination plan, with the power of the Wang family of Beihai and Dongqing Wudi, it was enough to give Chen Fangqing a heavy blow, and even push Li Huaqing away from Chen Fangqing completely. Now the elites of Zhongzhou state under the control of Mount Dibing were the key to providing evidence. Tianlan, Dongqing Wudi was silent for a moment and said softly, "He has been in the desert prison for too long. Even if you have the so-called evidence, the president's attitude on the blockade of the prison will not change. He and Chen Fangqing are estranged just because Chen Fangqing's means are too fierce, which is not in line with his principles of life. He doesn't want to take risks with Chen Fangqing. This doesn't mean that the president doesn't want to take over Beihai. The evidence you have may bring a lot of pressure to Chen Fangqing, but the president and the prime minister will not let go of the blockade of the prison. They both want to take over Beihai and don't want to see Tianlan cooperate with Beihai. So in any case, they will not let anyone send the news to the prison. It doesn't matter." Yi Dongxing smiled. "Comparatively speaking, what matters is His Highness's current identity. His Highness went to the desert prison mainly because of Qi Mulan's case. As long as Qi Mulan is proven guilty of treason, His Highness is innocent." "So what?" Dongqing Wudi said with some mockery, "If he is proven innocent, will Tianlan be released directly at this time? If that's the case, what's the point of blockading the desert prison? I mean, as long as His Highness is proven innocent, His Highness can do a lot of things. We will break through the blockade as soon as possible and reveal the termination plan to His Highness. The whole Beihai province is looking forward to the day when His Highness breaks through the blockade." Chapter 843. The prisoners in the desert prison were still calm. Without any information channels, they had no way of knowing what was happening in the outside world. However, the higher-ups of the prison were on high alert. The conference room that was used by Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing as a negotiation venue was filled with people. Xiao Mahai, a few deputy wardens, the commanding officer of Sky Arrow Air Force Base, the chief of staff, a few middle-level managers of the prison were gathered together. Although there was no panic, the atmosphere in the conference room was extremely heavy. Everyone. In the heavy atmosphere, the commanding officer of Sky Arrow Air Force Base, Kong Zhe, slowly said, 5 hours ago, the parliament unilaterally shut down all the control systems of Sky I Base. At the same time, they shut down the radar and positioning system of Sky Arrow Air Force Base. Most of the military equipment in the two bases are paralyzed. In this situation, if there is a serious criminal escaping, the Sky I Base will not be able to lock onto any target. Without the radar and positioning system, it will be difficult for Sky Arrow Air Force Base to send air forces to fight. We don't have a clear route. In the entire base, only a few top pilots can continue to operate the fighter jets. However, they can only take off and land. We can't even lock onto the target. The parliament hasn't given any orders to the base. It's only unilateral, but it has completely paralyzed our combat power. From now on, the two military bases near the desert prison have zero combat power. We need everyone to protect the safety of the prison from now on. 4 hours ago, our logistics personnel were detained in the northern military region. Although some daily supplies were sent over, they were all sent over by the elites of the 43rd Division. As for our people, we've lost contact with them. The head of logistics had a gloomy expression. Although the prison still has power, all external communication signals have been completely blocked. We can't get in touch with the outside world. Phones, internet, everything is in a state of disrepair. 2 of the prison staff were supposed to take a leave to visit their families. However, before they could leave the prison, they were sent back at gunpoint by the people of the 43rd Division. A deputy warden slammed the table and gritted his teeth. What are the people of the 43rd Division trying to do? They said that they were conducting a military exercise, so they temporarily blocked all access to the prison. Major General Kong Zhe sneered. His eyes were full of mockery. Then what's the point of blocking communication signals? The short-tempered deputy warden snorted coldly. They only blocked all our exit and entry routes. As for the signal jamming, they said it had nothing to do with them. Kong Zhe shook his head and couldn't help but look at Xiao Mahai, who was sitting in the main seat. Warden, what should we do now? Wait. Xiao Mahai said lightly. Everyone looked at each other. The current situation was obviously very abnormal. Wait. How long do I have to wait? There's no need to think about it. These things are all directed at us. To be precise, they are directed at His Highness. This is a blockade. No matter what the other party says, this matter is actually a blockade of the desert prison. Xiao Mahai said slowly. When Li Tianlan was not around, he was no longer the servile servant. He looked calm and composed. He glanced at the middle-level officer in charge of logistics, narrowed his eyes, and said softly, "Are the test results out?" "It's out. All the supplies sent by the 43rd Division are in line with our purchase list. They've all been tested. Normal, no poison." The logistics supervisor nodded. Xiao Mahai nodded. "What about the ingredients for His Highness?" "All tested. Normal, no poison." The eyes of the logistics supervisor were calm and relaxed. Xiao Mahai took a deep look at him and suddenly said with a self-deprecating smile, "At present, it seems that the Parliament obviously doesn't intend to poison or starve us. Our supplies are not cut off, no poison, but we can't have any form of contact with the outside world. That is to say, the Parliament just wants us to stay here quietly." No one spoke. Everyone was looking at Xiao Mahai. There are two possibilities. First, the Parliament doesn't want His Highness to leave the prison, or doesn't want His Highness to leave the prison now. But this blockade won't last long. The cost of using tens of thousands of troops to blockade a place is too high. Using this means shows the Parliament's determination and attitude that they don't want a long-term blockade. Second, the Parliament doesn't want His Highness to know something happened in the outside world. I don't know what it is, but it should be very important to His Highness. Similarly, tens of thousands of troops can't blockade here for a long time. So this matter is only important to His Highness now. Or, they think that after a period of time, even if His Highness knows about it, it won't affect them. We don't have to think too highly of ourselves. If His Highness isn't here, the Parliament won't target the desert prison with such great fanfare. Everyone's face was still solemn. Xiao Mahai was the warden here. It was such a tough job. Before Xiao Mahai came here, he was the commander of a group army in Zhongzhou State. After he came here, those who were sent here were naturally his trusted subordinates. For example, Air Force Base Commander Kong Zhe used to be the chief of staff of Xiao Mahai's group army. Other deputy wardens and middle-level cadres were also Xiao Mahai's trusted subordinates. Xiao Mahai had long been labeled as a member of the giant group. It could be said that he was the person closest to Li Tianlan. Now such a thing suddenly happened in the outside world. This showed that the situation outside had reached the most sensitive time. No one knew what was being blocked this time. But if the blockade was successful, Li Tianlan was destined to stay in the desert prison for the rest of his life, and they would not have a good end either. If the blockade failed, Xiao Mahai would have a meteoric rise, and all of them would also have a very good future. Everyone was nervous and a little excited. "Commander, give the order." Kong Zhe suddenly stood up, looked at Xiao Mahai, and said in a deep voice. At this moment, he subconsciously used the title he used in the group army. Xiao Mahai took a deep look at him and laughed. "I don't know what they are blocking, or they don't want His Highness to leave. But I'm sure that if this is a war and the 43rd Army is the enemy, the more they don't want us to do something, the more we have to try to do it. If they want to block His Highness, we will make a way for him. We will open a path for His Highness. If they want to suppress the news, we must know what they are suppressing." Xiao Mahai stood up and said calmly, "I'm going to try the strength of the blockade of the 43rd Army." Everyone stood up all of a sudden. Was Xiao Mahai going to break out of the blockade alone and see outside? "Commander." A deputy warden was silent for a while and said carefully, "Although we can't see His Highness now, should we tell Madam about this?" Xiao Mahai looked down at his watch and shook his head. Madam is still resting. No, the door of the conference room. It was suddenly pushed open. Xiao Qin, who was like a beautiful scenery in the prison, trotted in and shouted, "Dad, Madam wants you to go to her now." Xiao Mahai's body stopped, and then he turned and walked out of the conference room without hesitation. Everyone in the conference room looked at each other and finally sat down. Xiao Mahai came to Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai's dormitory as fast as he could. After getting up, Qin Weibai, who was neatly dressed, had already had breakfast. She was sitting in a chair and flipping through a thick notebook in her hand. "Madam." Xiao Mahai's voice was respectful, and he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "What happened?" Qin Weibai glanced at him and said quietly, "The internet suddenly can't be used." "Not only the internet." Xiao Mahai smiled bitterly. "All the communication equipment can't be used. The 43rd Army blocked all the passages to and from the prison at the same time. At present, the desert prison has been completely isolated. We can't contact the outside world, and the outside world can't contact us either." Qin Weibai's hand that was flipping through the notebook suddenly stopped, and she was silent for a long time. "Something happened to Yuetong." After a long time, she said slowly, "Either the Wang family of Beihai knows about Yuetong, or..." She shook her head slightly and said in a slightly heavier voice, "What a fool." Xiao Mahai thought that Qin Weibai was scolding him, so he bent down subconsciously and whispered, Yes, madam, I'm going to. What are you going to do?" Qin Weibai glanced at him. "I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the person who plans to deal with Yuetong." "What a fool." Xiao Mahai thought of the negotiation between Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao some time ago, and vaguely seemed to understand something. If the blockade of the desert prison was to prevent His Highness from cooperating with the Wang family of Beihai, then who personally ordered the blockade of the prison? The president? Or the prime minister? Xiao Mahai was a little nervous, but then he became determined. "What are you thinking about?" Qin Weibai asked calmly. "Madam, their blockade is too hasty. We don't know what's going on outside, and we don't know the specific reason why they suddenly blockade the prison. This is too passive. I think we should take advantage of the time when their blockade is not strict to break out. At least we can get some information." Xiao Mahai whispered, "I want to go and have a look." Qin Weibai raised her head, looked at Xiao Mahai seriously, and asked, "Do you know the consequences of doing this?" Xiao Mahai was stunned and said blankly, "I haven't thought about it. Once you fail to break out, you will be 100% accused of treason, and then you may not come back." Qin Weibai said lightly. Xiao Mahai was silent for a long time, and then said sullenly, "At least it's better than doing nothing." Qin Weibai lowered her head, looked at the notebook in her hand, and said softly, "It's okay." Xiao Mahai narrowed his eyes and did not speak. Qin Weibai did not speak either. Her eyes were fixed on the page of the notebook, on the last paragraph of the page. In October of the same year, Jiang Qiansong and his brothers died in South Africa, and the legend of Qin disappeared. In February of the next year, the East Emperor's guards came out and killed 3 invincible realm experts, shocking the world. The guards stood in front of the East Emperor Palace for 2 years, accompanied them day and night, and finally died in Beihai. The first and only guard of the East Emperor Palace. His code name is Ruthless. Chapter 844. Xiao Mahai waited for a long time. Qin Weibai didn't say anything. The prison seemed to be facing a formidable enemy, and the whole Zhongzhou state was nervous. It seemed to end with her words. Xiao Mahai thought about it many times, but he couldn't figure out what it meant. Did it mean that nothing would happen to the prison? Or that nothing would happen to the outside world? Or was it something else? Xiao Mahai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He was actually a little afraid of Qin Weibai, or not exactly afraid. But in front of her, he always had a kind of uneasiness that he couldn't describe. Qin Weibai was not an easy person to get along with. She and Li Tianlan both looked very quiet. But Li Tianlan was purely quiet. And Qin Weibai's silence had a kind of indescribable indifference and arrogance. No matter where she was, what she did, and what posture she had a kind of unattainable calmness and coldness. This kind of sharpness that was enough to make most people shrink back might only be restrained when she was around Li Tianlan. When Xiao Mahai was alone with her, his posture was even more respectful than when he was with Li Tianlan. Do what you have to do. Qin Weibai turned a page of the notebook. She didn't look up, but said quietly, "Okay." Xiao Mahai nodded and turned to leave. He didn't react until he was out of the door. What he had to do? Serving Li Tianlan was his biggest responsibility. But he hadn't seen Li Tianlan for nearly 2 months. Li Tianlan was now raising his sword. The area where he raised his sword had been completely regarded as a forbidden area of the prison. Qin Weibai personally sent his 3 meals every day. What else should he do? Xiao Mahai shook his head fiercely. His mind was a little confused. He walked back to the conference room in a daze, sat in his seat, and didn't speak for a while. Everyone in the conference room was looking at him with concern. No one here knew Qin Weibai. But almost everyone had heard of the legend of this goddess. Compared to them, and even compared to Li Tianlan, she was the one who truly stood at the top. Whether it was before or now, everyone wanted to hear the goddess's opinion on the current situation. Corps Commander. Kong Zhe waited for a while and finally couldn't help but call out. Xiao Mahai's voice was a little erratic. What did Madam say? Kong Zhe was a little nervous. Madam, Xiao Mahai hesitated for a moment and smiled bitterly. Madam said it's fine. She asked me to do what I should do. Kong Zhe was stunned and asked subconsciously, then what do you want to do? Xiao Mahai's mind went silent for a moment. He immediately understood. Qin Weibai asked him to do what he should do. At a time like this, what he should do wasn't important. What was important was what he wanted to do. Before he went to see Qin Weibai, he decided to break through the blockade outside the prison by himself. That was what he should be doing right now. Xiao Mahai suddenly stood up. Kong Zhe was startled. She looked at him cautiously. What's the situation outside? Xiao Mahai asked in a deep voice. An hour ago, in addition to the 43rd Army, the Beijiang military region also used 2 heavy armored regiments. At present, more than half of the military strength has appeared near the prison, and the number has exceeded 40,000. In addition, Gu Qianchuan, the acting governor of Kunlun City, appeared in the station of the 43rd Army. It seems that the Beijiang military region intends to completely block us at all costs. According to their actions, it is estimated that in another 8 hours, the desert prison will become a real isolated island. At that time, even a fly can't fly out. Kong Zhe took a deep breath and said in a gloomy tone. All the communication within the prison had failed. The message could only be transmitted by the most primitive means. The station area of the 43rd Army was 60 miles away from the prison, which was the front line. The people they sent out must be close to the front line, then run back to report the news, and then run back again, back and forth. The news, he said, was the latest situation that came an hour ago. Gu Qianchuan. 40,000 people, 8 hours. Xiao Mahai narrowed his eyes tightly and muttered to himself. Corps Commander, I'll kill our way out with you. The deputy warden, who was in charge of interrogations, stood up and said resolutely, You're right. He had always been hot-tempered. Seeing that Xiao Mahai wanted to break out, he didn't bother to consider any consequences and directly showed his attitude. Nonsense. Kong Zhe glared at him. At this time, there is no possibility of success to break out. Tens of thousands of people gathered in such a small place in the desert. There are countless detection instruments, a large number of advanced military equipment, and experts of the invincible realm. It's impossible to break out. We have to do it even if it's impossible. Xiao Mahai said. Kong Zhe froze for a moment. This time, the blockade is aimed at Your Highness and Emperor Dong's palace. It's not appropriate for Your Highness to show up for the time being. But it doesn't mean that Emperor Dong's palace doesn't need to show its attitude in the face of the army of Zhongzhou state. This kind of attitude can only be expressed by me. Xiao Mahai said calmly, I'm the director of Emperor Dong's palace. The army has sealed us. If I don't show up, should I let Madam take the risk? His Highness and his wife built the current Emperor Dong's palace together. We have all kinds of reputations in the outside world, but we never shrink back. We are cowards who bully the weak and fear the strong. We don't have such a reputation now, and we can't have it in the future. But Kong Zhe was a little annoyed. But it's Zhongzhou state that seals us. Zhongzhou state, Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan. No one would think that the three were not one. Toughness, madness, and overbearingness were all external. But Zhongzhou state was still one of them. Yes, it's Zhongzhou state that seals us. Xiao Mahai said meaningfully. Kong Zhe froze and took a deep look at Xiao Mahai. At this moment, no one could understand Xiao Mahai's meaning except for him. From this moment on, the most bitter lieutenant general in Zhongzhou state seemed to have completely unloaded all his identities in Zhongzhou state and completely stood in the position of the director of Emperor Dong's palace. Corps commander, we can't be sure of His Highness's attitude. Kong Zhe became serious and said slowly. I can be sure. Xiao Mahai smiled and whispered, I remember when His Highness was in Eastern Europe 2 years ago, he once said something to Sword Emperor. Kong Zhe was a little confused. At that time, Li Tianlan was still the youngest marshal in Zhongzhou state. His every move and every word was the focus of attention. Many sensitive topics would also be recorded, but they could only be viewed with certain authority. After all, Xiao Mahai was a lieutenant general, and he had enough authority. The words and deeds of some people that needed his authority to see were often sensitive. Maybe many years later, a certain person or a certain sentence would appear in the history of Zhongzhou state. What is it? Kong Zhe asked. Xiao Mahai took a deep breath. A tiny but incomparably sharp electric arc curled around his body, faintly discernible. He had not fought with others for many years, but he was forcibly recovering. His body was straight, and his fighting intent was rising little by little. In the subtle light of the arc, he looked extremely determined. If Zhongzhou state doesn't let me down, I won't let Zhongzhou state down. Xiao Mahai said lightly, whether it's His Highness or Emperor Dong's palace, or even everyone, it should be the same. Li Tianlan said this in Eastern Europe, but until now, no one had asked Li Tianlan what would happen if Zhongzhou state failed him. Why? What was sacred, lofty, worthy of love, and worthy of everything in everyone's eyes would not be let down. So this question was meaningless. When that day came, there were only choices. Just like Xiao Mahai's choice now. It represented the choice of Emperor Dong's palace. Outside the prison, the morning sun rose high in the sky. Under the scorching sun, thousands of miles of yellow sand could be seen. An incomparably dazzling lightning rushed out of the gate of the desert prison and rushed to the front line 60 miles away. It moved forward with indomitable will. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.